What's going on, everybody? It's Rumpo here, and today I am bringing you another Prima Games video. This time out, we are covering EA Sports UFC, and I am going to talk briefly about things you can do to be more successful with the submission game, especially on offense. When we're talking about submissions, the most important thing that you need to remember is that fighters with high submission ratings will almost always be able to tap out fighters with low submission ratings. To put this into perspective for you, think about Frank Mir versus Pat Barry. Frank Mir has an extremely high submission rating, while Pat Barry has a great rating in the stand-up game. If Frank Mir is able to take that fight to the ground, Pat Barry is basically a fish out of water, and there's almost no doubt that Frank will sink in some type of hold or choke. At the same time, submission rating is not everything. You also have to factor in stamina. So as high as Frank Mir's submission rating is, and as low as Pat Barry's is, if Pat Barry is the fresher fighter and Frank Mir is exhausted, that is going to make things extremely difficult for you trying to finish that fight by submission. From a statistical standpoint, you want to make sure that you not only have a high-rated submission artist, you want to make sure your opponent does not, and also that you are the fresher fighter when you go for that hold. What that does is actually slows down your opponent's escape gates. When I say escape gates, I'm talking about that little octagon that pops up where your opponent has to press the right stick in any direction to try and escape. If they have a low submission rating and they're exhausted, that slows down, which gives you more time to be able to block them from getting out of the way. Now, for those of you that aren't actually familiar with the controls or are not as familiar as they would like to be, there's some other things that you can do to make sure that you can get an easy submission. This is done by taking the fight to the ground, and every single fighter on the roster can do this. You want to either go for a single leg takedown or a double leg takedown, and more importantly, you want to go for a power takedown. The power takedown will land you in side control, which means your body will be across your opponent's body and your feet will not be tied up by their feet whatsoever. From here, every fighter on the roster is capable of pulling off a Kimura. It's a very simple hold for your shoulder, and it's the way that Frank Mir actually broke a Minotauro Nogueira's arm a few years ago. The last tip that I want to give you about submissions, I'm actually going to refer to career mode, and I highly suggest that you play through career mode and you do all of the training. At some point during your career, you will be asked to do submission training. Myself, I was lucky enough to have them bring in a fresh Benson Henderson, and as I tried to submit him, it was extremely difficult. It took me in the neighborhood of 15 minutes to pull off because he was so quick with his escapes. However, as frustrating as that is, that practice was absolutely essential to me getting better. What it did was made me faster, so when I got into a real fight, it seemed like my opponent was almost moving in slow motion, and ever since then, I've actually preferred going for submissions over knockouts. There's just something about making your opponent quit rather than turning the lights out. Alright everybody, so that is some basic information about the submission game. It's not everything, but if you're struggling, it should be a few good ideas to keep in mind and get you started. For more information on EA Sports UFC, please come over to www.primagames.com. Once there, you will be able to see tons of information about the game, such as beginner's tips, advanced tips, career mode tips, and everything else. I will see you in the next Prima Games video. Take care.